1. When I was a teenager, I worked at a bread-based fast casual dining establishment. I was a quick study, a hard worker, and good with the customers. I was also one of the few people there that knew how to work every station. At some point, a new manager was hired. Jane. Jane was mean. And she had little regard for food safety rules, for example. She rarely changed her gloves, and I don't ever recall seeing her wash her hands for longer than 2 seconds, no soap. She also had a habit of eating on the line. For those unfamiliar with these types of bread-based fast casual cafes, customers can pretty easily see you when you're on the line. Even if they couldn't, you're not supposed to eat there anyway. One night we're closing and she's in rare form. I was in charge of closing down the coffee and condiment station. This included refilling the condiment and utensil cups, which were set into a large wooden block and angles out toward the customer. I fill everything up and start to leave when I hear Jane yell, "Umlauts, come here!" I go over and she's pointing at the condiment station. I ask her what was up and she said, "You can't leave before you finish closing down your station." But I am finished. "The forks are practically empty." I then try to explain to her that the forks only appear somewhat empty because we put them prongs down, and the pronged ends take up more room in the bottom of the cup than the handles do at the top of the cup. We fill them this way for several reasons, such as preventing people from being stabbed and or preventing strangers from touching the business end of utensils other people will be using. I also tried to point out that if you put too many in, then the next person to come along will spill forks everywhere because they get tangled, for lack of a better word. Anyway, she cut me off and told me to fill the forks all the way, and to just do it because she was my manager, and that's what she was telling me to do. Okay, if you say so. I filled the fork cup up all the way, as requested, even jammed a few extra ones in there just in case. Because, even though the forks will now be a huge pain in the ass to get out, I didn't want her to accuse me of not doing what she asked. I tell her it's done. She's too busy rifling through the refrigerators under the line to care much, but says I can go as long as the forks are full. I meander out, saying goodnight to people and gathering my stuff. As I'm talking to another employee in the back, I see Jane with some sort of food she's gotten from the line. I think it was a scoop of chicken or tuna salad, but I can't remember and it doesn't really matter. What does matter is that whatever it was, it needed a fork. I stick around just long enough for her to pull a fork from the utensil cup, which was really the sound of tons of metal forks falling on the floor. This was followed by a guttural sound of anger and frustration. My minor malicious compliance complete, I very hurriedly slip out the door and head home. 2. I'm gonna come right out and say I don't like bragging about my service, but I love bragging about my service. I work at a seafood restaurant and we're known for big seafood boils, but we're a small kind of hidden gem restaurant. Now this happened a while back and I still remember the incident 6 months later. I had about 4 tables at the moment and I managed pretty easily until I'm sat with a table of 8 grown adults. They were all super nice and very chatty. Everyone ordered their own seafood boils and had some alcoholic drinks from the bar. About an hour and a half in, one of the guys at the table asks me to do a round of shots for everyone, but he was only paying for 4 of his family members. I proceed to send the ticket in, and the mom of the table said she was only going to pay for her son's shot, who was sitting next to her, and her own shot. So I have now placed an order for 6 out of 8, and the other 2 meekly stated they pay for their own. This is where everything goes downhill. The mother's bill was well over $100 with about $15 of gratuity for me. The guy who paid for his own food had a good amount of drinks on his tab. He had about $7 of gratuity and everyone else was less than that. I walk over with all of their very confusing tickets because everyone was at least paying for something else that someone else had ordered, and then the mom sees her total. I thought nothing of it since she was paying for a grown son and they both had roughly 5 drinks alone on the ticket. She looks at me and yells, I can't pay for this. I only brought enough money for the food we came to eat, and I can't pay for the gratuity. After going back and forth for a few minutes, I had to keep explaining to her that the tip would go towards me for the service and that we do indeed have a sign saying gratuity is added for bigger tables and for my time. She was practically begging me to take it off. At this point, everyone else's eyes are now glued to the bottom of their ticket, and they all start agreeing with her. I'm just standing there in shock because how does that even make sense? I wasn't that new to the restaurant, so I knew I could take the gratuity off as the server of that table, and I told her this calmly while low-key blooming with rage and embarrassment. I grabbed her ticket and of course everyone else hands theirs back wanting their $5 taken off. I sulk back to my managers and explain to them that my party of 8 can't pay the gratuity, and to just take it off. This made one of my managers super angry because he was working host that night, and that same party of 8 tried showing up last night after we had closed and my manager sent them away. The real kick in the balls was he told them he would bring them the best server, me, if they showed up the next day, and that's exactly what they did. This is already very long, so I'll cut to the chase. I wiped my hands of them and took care of my other tables while avoiding them, as my manager confronted them, cashed them out, and sent them on their way. After, my manager told me that the mom stated I was a great server and they'd still leave me a tip. It was $22 in cash. And honestly, since I didn't care about the tip or them, I was grateful because I was so angry I was going to burst into tears. I never saw them again, and I hope I never do. 3. This is a rant. I apologize ahead of time. It's not busy, not dead, like slow, steady. I'm at the to-go register and host stand area, with the host and to-go person just looking over my sales. A guy comes up to ask me to make an order for 3. Sure, let me get that to-go order rung up for you. No, that's not what he meant. He wanted a server to ring a dine-in meal without being seated in the building. In my 6 years of serving, I'm a bit flabbergasted. I asked him what he meant. He said his friends weren't here yet, so he was going to go outside and wait for them. My colleague and I look at each other a bit dumbfounded. I said I can't serve you if you're not seated in the building. Otherwise, my colleague can get a to-go order for you fast. The guy begged, and I think I'm wise with picking and choosing fights, so I gave in. You're not going to be a priority, though. I can put the order in. He left. 10 minutes later, the order is up, and I instantly take it to the table I nicely set up without anybody there. I try not to care because I knew from the start I wasn't getting tipped. But I take some pride in how I do my job, so it feels so wrong. First time I felt so in the right, but so wrong because that's not normal me. 20 minutes later, him and one friend come in stinking of weed. I don't care about the weed. Just want them to be out fast. After I let them settle for 10 minutes, I come around to give more attention to my tables and see how shit is. These wings aren't how we like them. They proceed to play a huge guessing game about some other co-worker server of mine that knows how they like it. That took 7 minutes alone. They then called over my colleague passing by to help remember who. I ask, okay, what is the point of this? She's not working right now. They just want a remake. Wow, never thought that's where this was going. So I go back to tell my morning line cook the correct way. 10 minutes later, they pop up. My colleague comes in telling me he thinks they left. He even checked the bathrooms for me. I wait 5 minutes, no sign of return, clean up and proceed my shift. A fucking hour passes after that, they come back, surprised their table is cleared off. They tell me they were just waiting in their car until the wings were ready. This is where I mentally snapped, grabbed my GM to talk to them because WTF, dude. She got it through to them that they want dine-in food, they have to use dine-in. So they do. They're quiet, very high, and not as annoyed as I am at the moment. I bring out a single napkin, 2 straws and waters with barely any ice in them, their food and the bill in one piece. No check-ins, nothing. I come back only when I see them looking at the bill, wondering why they got charged for extra condiments that usually nobody ever charges for. But you should. This time I did because, fuck off, not like I was getting a tip anyways. Can you see the menu again? Sure. These ranches are usually free. I say no. Point to the area on the menu in his hands that say extra condiments are 60 cents each. They paid, didn't tip, and left all upset. Like, dude, don't waste my time like that and just get to go next time you want to get high in a parking lot. I felt so terrible because I've never done that before to a table, ever. But don't regret it because how the hell was I supposed to handle that? 4. Back in college, I worked every break in summer when possible to help make a dent in, well, that debt life. One summer, though, after studying abroad a month on a grant, I returned home having completely missed any seasonal work, and wound up staying with my dad while I got the only job I could find, a more expensive retro diner brand that happened to be franchised. I have so many choice anecdotes about the 2 weeks I managed to work there before quitting. And so I present to you 3 stories of 3 managers. Manager 1, vulgar homophobe. Manager 1 could tell I was gay, I think, or at least was aware he made me uncomfortable and liked to do that thing where insecure straight men assert dominance by being especially misogynistic. When a younger woman entered the place the first day I worked a shift he was on, he leaned to me and told me he would like to stick his plunger handle, well, you get the idea. I'm sure he wasn't a qualified plumber. Or a gynecologist. That, however, was child's play compared to my second shift with him. In the late afternoon, a party of 3 arrived, 2 women accompanying an elderly nun paralyzed in a wheelchair, wearing her habit and smiling broadly in an expression that seemed permanent. I was going to take them and seat them someplace accessible and try to make sure the ass-hattery didn't impact them. But just as I was heading to them, I heard my manager clearly at a volume audible to the party of 3. Man, nothing gets me harder than a crippled nun. I straight up froze and couldn't believe it. During that brief moment of shock, another server sniped them and sat them at one of their tables. Manager 2. Wait, we have a manager 2? Manager 2 was an older woman who took every chance to berate us about how our independent franchise was performing at the bottom of the nationwide list, below those owned and managed by corporate. She also took tables from us when there was a potential for larger tips, and would take long smoke breaks without warning. I didn't actually have much experience with her, but it was policy of the owner that none of us could handle cash or credit cards except to present them to a manager. All financial transactions, including running cards, could only be done by managers. I had one of my largest parties yet seated there that day, one of whom was the mother of someone I graduated with locally, who didn't recognize me at all. I did my best to handle everything, so they were seated outside. We were lightly staffed, and I was new to the parties of 6 or more. In the process, I made an effort to be authentic and kind, and it came up in conversation that I just joined the diner staff that week. When it came time for the bill, and I was hopeful that I'd at least get a sympathy 20%, that's when I realized my manager was missing. I went to each server. Can you run cards? No. Do you know where manager 2 is? Probably on a break, like all the time. Do you know when she left or will be back? Laughter. Needless to say, 40 minutes later that table was less than patient, and instead of a tip, I was just lucky they hadn't walked out without paying. Policy was that if they had, it'd be deducted from wages and tips. Yeah. Manager 3. And I quit. Manager 3 was a clearly angry man who didn't seem like he wanted to work with any of us, let alone be cordial or social. When he spoke, it was an order or a criticism or a personal slight. Returning from dinner break that day, I got immediately pulled into the office with Manager 3.
So why'd you do it?
Do what?
You know what you did. Admit it.
I was eating a PB&J on the steps for the past half hour. I don't really know what you're talking about.
Likely story. I'm watching you now. Get back to work.
I checked in with a coworker, and during my dinner, someone had apparently put in an order, either mistakenly or maliciously, an $80 order that was made and went to waste. Under the owner's policy, that person would have to pay full menu price, so nobody was coming forward. The evening wrapped up. In and after the last customer, Manager 3 locked the front door so that we couldn't leave, and called us around him, in his hands a pile of papers.
I know about all of you. I have your resumes right here, and you're all filthy, useless people who should be ashamed of yourself.
While I bit my tongue, he said he would be sitting there until someone came forward. At server's wage, $2.13 an hour, I wasn't too keen on this. We sat there for what felt unbearably long, until finally he changed his mind. He would deduct $25 from all 6 of our wages when we clocked out, plus $5 for jukebox buckles we were given and returned each shift. One girl I worked with had dealt with another screwed-up order that day, and I shit you not, Manager 3 made her pay him $10 in order to clock out and go home. I wanted to quit on the spot witnessing that. I more or less broke even and took home no tips, and left in a hurry because the schedule for the next week was up, and I was working the next morning. Next morning I showed up, and Manager 3 saw me and immediately barked,
"Why are you even here? This is your day off!"
Turns out the schedule changed that night, and I now was working 6 shifts, including a weekend that I had already cleared with someone during the onboarding that I would be visiting my boyfriend out of state, and the evening I had night class.
Why, you're too stupid to even take your day off.
This isn't the schedule we saw yesterday. I'm off these days this week like we discussed this month.
The schedule is what it says. Don't give me that. Go home and come back tomorrow.
I walked out, called a coworker who had trained me and told her I quit, and only returned for my last paycheck later that month. The owner had no idea who I was and was completely unsurprised I was leaving. After everything, plus the cost of the clothes we had to wear and my notepad and pen, and stupid shit like that, I made about $50 in total. 5. I was working as a barista in the city, taking orders at the till on a particularly busy Saturday afternoon. This older lady gets out of the front of the queue. She seems disinterested and fed up from the get-go, but whatever, that's like the majority of the general public when you're working in this industry. I'm in a pretty good mood, think nothing of it, and greet her with my best customer service smile.
I want to order a coffee, but I can't say the name of it because we're at war with them.
First of all, I live in the UK, which hasn't been at war for a good number of years. Touch wood. Secondly, it's worth noting here that this coffee shop I work at was one of those specialty pick-your-own-blend type places, and did most every type of coffee you could think of. This got confusing, for all involved, at the best of times, let alone when given whatever sort of criteria this was supposed to be. Often when customers were insistent on being vague for whatever reason, I'd make an educated guess and had a pretty good success rate. But what could I go off here? I acknowledge her reservations and politely explain that I don't really understand what she wants. I asked her if she could explain what kind of drink it was, if it was a blend or a coffee type. She didn't want to say. Really just any clues, literally anything. Imagine the biggest full-body sigh you've seen ramp it up a notch. That's what her response was.
I'm not going to say the name of it.
Bear in mind, too, there is an enormous queue behind her full of stairs that just keeps building. This starts to stress me out. So I began the hopeless endeavor of trying to guess what on God's green earth she could mean. We go through this mutually humiliating back and forth, during which she gets increasingly angry for each second that I don't get it. I ask yet again if there is any more information she could give me to help me get her what she wants.
I won't say it. I won't support them. I won't be any part of it.
Apparently she'll drink it. So I continue reeling off anything you could think of. Honestly, I don't think she even listened to the majority of what I said. It's a real possibility she missed a correct guess while flailing angrily. After a bit, she starts outright yelling, banging her fists on the counter, getting closer to me. Thankfully, there was a plastic screen that separated us. At one point, she turned to a young couple stood behind her who, by the way, looked terrified, and gestured towards me to imply I was crazy. All in all, this lasted for what felt like forever, but what was realistically the best part of 10 minutes.
Fine. The USA coffee. Are you happy?
Better than ever, thanks. I'm not sure if seeing that phrase when you're away from the situation makes it obvious what she wanted. But for me, my brain was too frazzled to try and decode anything anymore. I was anxious, I was stressed, and I just wanted her to tell me what the fuck kind of coffee she wanted. I kind of just blankly stare at her as she continues to talk to me like I'm the biggest idiot on the planet, hoping she'll eventually get bored and just tell me her order. She doesn't. Quick reminder, there's still an enormous queue.
Because this is Britain, and if there's one thing the British people know, it is how to queue. We will stand in line. We will hear you refusing to order what is clearly an Americano coffee, and we will hear you. We will frown. We will think naughty thoughts about you, but we will not say a word, because we, madam, are queuing.
But anyway, it finally gets to the point where I straight up walk off the till and tell my manager I'm not serving her anymore. I go on break while someone else deals with it because, of course, asking her to leave as I requested was off the cards. Customer's always right, am I right? No, never. Most often, no. I come back after my break, and she sat down with her drink. I don't know how long it has taken since my efforts, but it was done now. The puzzle was finally solved. Americano. She wanted an Americano this whole time. Hey everybody, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to Spinning Plates, episode 180. I said it like that for reasons. Okay, this is Saturday, the day of Sat. It's a special day among my people. It's when we all sit down and go, So I'll be doing that today, hopefully. Before I forget, we have a little shout out to give to the author of the final story there, and that goes to Reddit user Ghost is My King. Thank you very much for letting us use your story, Ghost is My King. Not feeling too bad at the moment, so fingers and toes and eyes crossed. Well, maybe not the eyes. Might fall over if we do that. Not the toes either. Just the fingers. Okay, just fingers crossed then. And I'll do a stream on Saturday. Probably Sherlock Holmes. But if anybody wants to play Phasmo, of course, we'll play a little Phasmo too. Okay. But before we go, we're going to have Hellfreezer's question of the day. And today's question is, I'm going to frighten some of you here. We're almost at the end of July. We're heading into August now. We are really not that far away from Christmas when you think of how far this year has gone. So, when do you start your Christmas shopping, if that's something you do? And if you don't celebrate Christmas, when do you start your holiday shopping for whatever celebration you have to do preparation for? Okay, and with that, I'm going to head off for now. So until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourselves.